And political strategist Kipchumba Karori. I have with me political analysts Hesbono Wheeler and Mark Bichachi, as well as political risk analyst Dismas Mokua. Morning, gentlemen. Thank you for joining me. Let's start with what's happening in the newspaper dailies this Sunday morning. All right, let's begin with the Sunday Nation, and the splash is the DPP Nordin Haji's bombshell, targeting big names with cases, and there's an analysis here of some of the big names with cases ongoing. We have, of course, the Migori Governor Okoth Obado, who has been facing murder and weapons charges. Busia Governor Sospita Ojamong, who has been facing abuse of office charges. The National Land Commission Chairman Mohammed Sazuri, who is in court over loss of funds. That story is in more details in page 8 of the Sunday Nation. High Court will be ruling on a petition filed by the DPP, the Director of Public Prosecutions, Nordin Haji, and which may see NLC boss Mohammed Sazuri, the Migori Governor Okoth Obado, his Busia counterpart Sospita Ojamong forced out of office until their cases are concluded. Dismas, Nordin Haji saying you haven't seen anything yet. Do you think this is practical?
In my view, the DPP should now stop doing media interviews. It's done sufficient number of interviews, and Kenyans now want to see blood. People would like to see successful prosecutions. He's been telling us at times above number that he's going to teach people who have engaged in corruption a lesson. And we've been waiting patiently. We haven't seen any blood spilling. So instead of doing all these interviews, he should now engage in successful prosecutions, because we want to see these architects of corruption behind bars. Kenyans would like to see successful prosecutions, and they'd like to see recovery of those assets.
But isn't this a good proposal to have those facing criminal charges out of office?
Well, that's a very exciting proposition. But you see, our Chapter 6 and Article 10, as well as the Leadership and Integrity Act, has been mutilated. The person really who are guilty of these offenses, majority of them are elected officers, and that may not apply to them. But really, at the end of the day, we want to see consequences for engaging in corruption, whether you are elected, whether you're in the public sector. Because right now, the people who've been stealing with success, right now, they're very successful. A number of them are successful politicians. They're the ones who are attending church this morning. They're going to be given front seats. They'll be landing there in choppers. And then, the local pastors and priests would say, see how the Lord is working miracles. All the people that have been mentioned by the Auditor General for the last 6 years, especially from county governments, they're still in office. This story, my attention has been attracted to a story on page 11. We're having MCAs going to Kigali. They're going to spend 16 million, Bob, on some benchmarking. We are being told that the governors have got secret accounts everywhere. It seems to me that everybody in the public sector has been given very firm instructions to steal, because there is no consequence. In other countries, in South Africa, right now, Zuma is in trouble because of this kind of manner. We know what is happening in Singapore. We know what is happening in South Korea. But in Kenya, you steal, then all of a sudden, if you're interested in politics, you're going to get a seat, you go to elective office, and then you amend the laws. And I think our biggest disaster was the Leadership and Integrity Act, which was mutilated by the members of the National Assembly.
Mark, the DPP warns people vacating office until when they're facing criminal charges. It also wants their salaries, allowances, and other benefits halted. Is this the right step?
Of course, it's the right step. And, I keep telling Kenyans that if we're going to fight corruption, we must rise above the legality of things, because the right thing is not always the legal thing. And sometimes the right thing is not even written in law. For example, if you look at Japan, okay, if today a train derailed in Japan, I promise you, before that day the last cock crows, that particular minister of transport will step down. It's not a matter of law, but it's a matter of taking responsibilities, because at some point we must agree that there's a place where the buck stops. And for me, I find it ridiculous that we have CSs in office whose ministries have been involved in grand corruption corruption, and the CS is not even perturbed or moved. In fact, in the case of the energy CS, we saw him saying he wishes he was the one who was put in jail instead of Kenya Power employees who were being charged with corruption.
Right.
We see today NHIF, which is under the Ministry of Health, the CS is sitting pretty in her corner office when NHIF is in shambles. You know, this is the kind of disassociation of our leadership from the impact of what their leadership is that is making Kenya ungovernable and is making corruption take root in this country. If people were forced to step down for sins of commission and omission, so basically if you did the thing, which is a commission, then you were taken to task for it, but also if you are in charge of a ministry, in charge of a parastatal, and on your watch you allowed theft to happen, if you allowed impunity to happen, you should equally go home. And that's the reality. So it's not about, until we've exhausted all forms of appeal. Today in this bench where we sit, if you allowed me to say something that is illegal, that is either hate speech or is a foul word, you would be held accountable. But we don't seem to have the same culture within our government and within our political class. And that's what we need to change. The buck has to stop somewhere, and people's heads need to start rolling even before the law catches up with them.
All right. That story is on page 8 of the day of the Sunday National and the Sunday Standard on page 2. It's a similar story about another probe that is targeting a secret helicopter fund at the Council of Governors. Governors have been funding a secret account operated by the Council of Governors headquarters to hire choppers that have seen some adopt the lives of kings. Hesbon, what's your take on this? 170,000 shillings is what it costs per hour to hire a helicopter. What do you think of this?
Well, I think this is taxpayers' money, and if governors are, looking for loopholes to live large at the expense of development in their counties, it's just prudent that the office of the public prosecutor, EACC, and DCI investigates the manner in which money is channeled to the Council of Governors and then used for things that may not necessarily be of benefit to the public. So I think to that extent, it's just important that we get to understand the mechanism and whether it is provided in law, and if it is not, who is culpable. Because if it is not provided for in law and there is no proper mechanism and a show cause of what all these travels using choppers are meant to do for the public and the specific counties, then people should just be held accountable. And I think I want to agree with Dismas that the corruption, the anti-corruption war and the agencies charged with the fight against corruption, especially the office of the DPP, is becoming a lot more populist, and it's dangerous because it seems like he's treading that thin line between the popular opinion of the people, or of most Kenyans who want guys who are mentioned adversely in corruption to be charged, and on the other side, a watertight evidence that would sustain prosecution of these people. Right. And the best thing to do is just to desist from, eliciting populism and exciting people before he's even sure of the evidence against these governors. Because truth be said, I mean, the Leadership and Integrity Act is a moral issue. And unless somebody is charged, I'm not so sure that Kenya is a culture where people will step down. And if you are to think of people stepping down, we have to go all the way to the topmost seat in this country, the executive, because I'm sure if President Uhuru Kenyatta was to crack the whip and just, pave the way for anyone who is mentioned adversely, to step aside, it would work. But as it is right now, I think that will has not been demonstrated. I think the Director of Public Prosecution should rather concentrate on getting evidence. And by the time we see these guys in court, before they fight back and get bails and fight corruption, we should have that evidence that incriminates them if they are culpable.
Kipchumba, the figures of what's happening in the counties are mind-boggling. 350 million every year is what the COG receives from the counties. Just 24 million is what Mombasa County paid the COG in the 2014-2015 financial year. 12.5 million was paid by Nyamira County. The county of Nyamira, without authority. 14 million is what Kisumu paid the COG for undisclosed services. And Vihiga County county executive paid around 6 million to the Council of Governors to cater for the devolution conference and liaison office rent. I mean, what do you take from this and how the DPP is dealing with all this?
Then it must be understood that COG is a limb within our legal regime. It was brought forth by the law. And when you look at our budgetary allocation, the national budget, we do not have a budget going to the COG directly. The budget going to the COG goes to the COG through the counties. And therefore, even as we look at the figures, we must ask ourselves, what share, what we should be asking is, what is the share of each county, or what is the rationale of how counties should contribute money to the COG? That should be the first point. And then the second point will be the prudent use of the funds after being allocated to COG. COG is not above the law. We have the Public Finance Management Act in this country. It states how public funds should be used. And I think the Auditor General should crack the whip and make sure that all those funds channeled to COG are used in a prudent manner. Secondly, to the issues of DPP Haji. While I commend him for doing a commendable job, for even trying to shake the dust of how our prosecutions have been done, I must also invite him to the history of this country. That a couple of years ago, we had Professor P.L.O. Lumumba, who did not deal with corruption, but talked to corruption. He talked to corruption until he left office. He did nothing. The other thing that DPP Haji must realize is that we are a country governed by a set of laws, and we are not. It is a rule of law and not ruled by law. We cannot use law as a tool of subjugation and a tool of harassing people. In our constitution, we have an article there, Article 50, which addresses itself to the issues of natural justice. You cannot today purport and come out and say because somebody has been charged with a corruption case, they should now cease be holding office, do all these things. Why? Because in 2013, we elected people who had a case in the ICC, and the charges there were more strong, and they had a lot of implication, more than what the DPP is talking about. And then again, what happens to the issues of you are innocent till proven guilty? If today you are arraigned in a court of law, and tomorrow you are charged with, let's say, obstructing justice, and you are told from here you are supposed to resign, do all these manner of things, doesn't that amount to we have already charged you, we have already taken you to be guilty before the due process? Secondly, and maybe the last point about the DPP.
Yes.
The DPP should communicate via alluding evidence in a court of law. He should not come to the media and tell us how the cases are going on. There was another day he was interviewed in a local news, in a local TV, and he told whoever was interviewing him that he was not happy with the bail and the bond terms of Governor Obado.
Right.
You cannot appeal in a media house. You appeal in the court that ranks higher than the court that made the ruling.
Right.
So the DPP should come out of the activism bubble and go back to court.
Let's stay with the graft issues, and it's a special report in the Sunday Standard. I want your quick thoughts on this. That is the monies, the 38 billion medical equipment leased out to the counties, which we understand the counties could be paying as high as 54 billion after that figure was, went up. But we understand there's a story here by Roslyn Obala and Jacob Ngetich. Fresh details in that scandal, what is turning out to be a medical leasing equipment scandal. Show how some companies originally awarded tenders to supply medical equipment ended up being awarded other unrelated tenders by ministry officials. We are talking about tenders to construct buildings at the health facilities, plumbing works, electrical works, roofing, landscaping and painting. And this is something that Bungoma Senator Moses Wetangula has spoken about, saying that it is akin to Anglo leasing. Dismas, what's your take on this?
Well, that is a typical case of grand looting. And when you speak with the governors, they actually tell you, most of them, they never requested for these medical equipment. So they were forced to take equipment, and when they declined, when majority of them declined, there was a very active propaganda machinery. People were sent to their constituencies, and the voters were being told that your neighbors and friends are dying because the governors have refused to buy medical equipment. So for instance, you buy X-ray equipment or cancer equipment, and you take it to a county, and this county has not requested for these equipment. They're not even aware. So the first thing you do is you acquire these assets.
Yeah.
You force a governor to accept. Then the second thing, you do not even provide the human resource to operate this equipment. I understand some of the equipment is in Chinese. So some fellas in the villages do not even know how to read Chinese. In the event that the asset breaks down, nobody knows how to repair it. So these governors, because they succumbed to that propaganda, or rather, they were unable to sit firm, they succumbed to propaganda. And now they've got medical equipment in their village lying idle. Most of those facilities, the equipment where they were installed, there's even no running water. Nobody seems to understand how to operate the machines, and we are spending resources. So these are typical case of the vendor-driven procurement, where top public servants sit in a room, they look at the budget, the annual budget, they say, out of these 100 billion, how much are we taking home? They agree on a figure, 50 billion. Are we going to do it? Let's force governors to accept the medical equipment. Then you proactively run a propaganda campaign such that any governor who attempts to say no is described as a villain. I recall in a number of funerals, governors were getting a beating. When somebody dies and a governor goes for a funeral, people start saying, wait a minute, this fellow has died because you refused to buy equipment. And for me, the senators, they can express their fury till the cows come home, but it doesn't make sense till we have prosecutions. And in my view, that's where Haji is supposed to zoom in. Instead of doing these media conferences, instead of giving us regular updates, let's see successful prosecution.
What you're saying makes sense. Some examples in this story. At the Kisii Level 5 hospital, despite having a new operational CT scan machine, it has received another similar one and an X-ray machine, which they did not request for from the Ministry of Health. And also the Kakamega Governor, Wycliffe, who is also the Council of Governors chairman, says, who is also the Council of Governors Finance Committee chair, that is Wycliffe, registered the governor's frustrations in the attempts to reject the project, saying they were even blackmailed that they were the cause of many deaths in their countries. Mark, how can this be arrested? Is it, where does the buck stop? Is it at the CS Sicily Karaoke's office? What happens here?
Definitely, the buck stops at CS Sicily Karaoke's office. That is without question. Simply because the policy and the decision to buy is controlled by her office. Now, there's a number of reasons why in this quagmire. First, there is obviously some form of corruption going on. But even worse, it is the fact that we as a country have very good ideas, but we never think how to execute them. We are the kind of people who buy a Mercedes-Benz without thinking how we are going to fuel it, or how we are going to service it, or how much the tires are going to cost us. And that's exactly what happened here. That number one, we did not think about the staffing of these particular hospitals. As we sit here today, there's been a freeze for 3 years for hiring doctors in this country. The graduates from medical school are working in private sector. None of them have been absorbed in any significant number by the national government. So you have a shortage of staff, but you've got a surplus of equipment. But we know these equipment are not autonomous. So the issue is the people who are driving policy have ideas, but these ideas are basically castles in the air. They have no foundations or basis in reality. But in their zeal to fulfill the universal health care pillar, which, of course, details things like having CT scans, X-ray machines in different levels of hospitals. It's a good idea, but they've not thought about it in a holistic sense. It is not just enough to provide machines. You also need to provide the people who are there. But you see, again, driven by the need for greed, you find that even if it doesn't have, you have to receive this machine. How else am I going to get my kickback? You know, for as long as that machine sits in that place, the governors have to pay, and someone somewhere in the ministry is getting some money.
Final issue here, Hesbon, very quickly, on page 4 of the Sunday Nation. Molon's on the way, this time to pay old debts. There we understand National Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich was explaining this decision. We're talking about 100 billion on the way to help pay all the debts.
Well, I think the loan issue is here with us to stay, for the simple reason that there is a lot of opaqueness in the way we operate our fiscal policy at Treasury. No one knows what that loan will finance. No one knows the rate at which you're going to pay that loan to warrant borrowing a loan to pay other loans. And I think it's an unfortunate thing when we live in a country that has Article 35, which talks about freedom of access to information, yet we have information that is indebting this country, and no one seems to understand what exactly we are doing with this amount of money and why we have to borrow to pay other loans and the interest rate and what it is doing to our lending rates in the international market. It's very unfortunate. But if I may just chip in on the governor's issue, I think if you calculate what the county governments have been billed, that is 485 million each county. It gets you 22.7 billion Kenya shillings. And that basically tells you that the procurement was corruption driven, that they were looking for this equipment because of the amount of money. And I think it's incumbent upon the Senate to just investigate this, because the Constitution gives Senate the mandate to ensure that things are working at the county level. That is at the point where they need to oversight. They took this case to court and it was knocked down on a technicality. I think they need to do their job and ensure that when they go to court, they have everything right.
All right. Kipchumba.
What perturbs me is how we are trying to, actually even the argument why Ministry of Health is purchasing equipment for counties in itself is illegal. Because when you look at our Schedule 4 of the Constitution, health is devolved and the power to purchase lies with the counties, because the finances of purchasing those equipment should be directed to counties so that the counties can take into consideration the unique needs, the unique health needs we each county have with their equipment. Why should you buy a renal unit equipment and take it to Marsabit where we do not have patients suffering from the same? Therefore, the other question that we ought to ask ourselves is this: are we really following the Public Finance Management Act? The Public Finance Management Act talks about you cannot expend money at the source. Even if the national government lists this equipment to the counties, it cannot pay without remitting the money to the county first, and then the county is paying from their accounts.
Right.
So, therefore, what we are looking at here is the question we'll ask ourselves before our DPP lectures us in our national televisions. These are the things he should investigate. He should investigate even the 100 million per container clinic scandal, so that Kenyans can get the value for their money. And to the issue of loans, every time I get to this issue of national debt, I ask myself, do we really have people at the helm of the finance or the treasury who understand what they are doing?
Right.
Because they have the capacity to renegotiate the payment of these loans.
All right, good question. You can check out those stories in more detail in the Sunday Standard, a lot of special reports and inside information on some of these things. Let's take a quick commercial break here on Sunday edition. When we come back, we shall be going to that all important, yet it did flop yet again for the third time. The gender bill debate flopping. This time the National Assembly